Welcome, everybody. My name is Amma van Danzig, and it is such a great pleasure to be invited here as the moderator of this session, this Wereld Café, of a rather sticky topic, isn't it? It's called Shift the Power. Shift the power. And it's when we talk about power, people get nervous because we're not quite sure what we mean, who has power, who doesn't have power, who's abusing power, like how old is this power? We're trying to understand what is the power and what needs to shift for change to happen. Because ultimately, I guess when we talk about shifting the power, it's because we sense that something needs to transform, something needs to change. And luckily, I don't sit by myself at home thinking about shifting power. There are a lot of wonderful people, powerful people. Everybody's powerful, by the way. Don't let anybody tell you you're not powerful. Who have been working on this topic and have been exploring this issue of shifting the power. And some of these people have asked me to moderate this session. So Wereld Café, as you can see on the background, has convened this together with Partos and Vice Versa magazine. Wereld Café, back in 2016, saw this hashtag Shift the Power emerge from the Global Fund for Community Foundation Summit. And it was really about looking at these more top-down vertical relationships and how can we make this movement from vertical relationships of someone at the top saying everybody at the bottom should move in a specific direction to maybe more horizontal relationships with more equal power, people-centered power, people-based approach to this. And Partos was involved in this as well, and they joined forces to have this conversation in the Netherlands. And this conversation has been had, typical Dutch style, thoroughly, on webinars, podcasts, articles, learning sessions. We've been exploring together. Papers have been written. A dream paper has been written, which we will be discussing today. And we've gotten our Ministry of Foreign Affairs also very keenly interested in this idea of shifting the power and looking at how Southern ownership can be more central. And together they're all in this, the Giving for Change Alliance. And so we're really very interested in understanding these shifts, because all these different parties, of course, have their own perspectives on what shifting the power means. When the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says they're interested in shifting the power, what does it mean? Who wants this shift anyway? In whose interest is it? Do we all mean the same thing when we say power needs to shift? We will discuss this this afternoon together. And I hope, as I've been introducing this, people have been gathering online. I also want you to know that you're not going to have to listen to me the whole time on my own. There are important people here who have joined us to have this conversation, and there are more people who are part of this conversation. Some of the people who are having this conversation include Bart Romein, the director of Partos, who's sitting here with me in the studio. Welcome, Bart.
Thank you,
yeah. We have Zora Mosa, the director of Mama Cash. Online, there's Zora. We have Moses Isoba, the director of Uganda National NGO Forum and partners at the Giving for Change Alliance. There's Moses, yes. We're going to do this on first-name basis. I hope all my speakers are not offended by this, because we want to be horizontal. I am Amma, you are Zora. You are not director or boss. And then we have Maite Smith, who is the coordinator of Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action. Thank you. Lovely that you all join us, also from different places. Moses is joining us from Uganda. Maite is joining us from Chile. Zora is joining us all the way from Amsterdam. And we are here in a studio in Amersfoort, Bart and I. Now, I know that you are out there, but I have to imagine this. Just like a dream paper, I also have to dream that the audience is there. But for me to get a sense of you being there, we have some polling questions, just so that we can try to be interactive. We will try also to keep this interactive as we go. There are opportunities to chat. But we have 2 polling questions. We will put the first polling question up, and then I will see your answers, and I will get a sense of who has joined us, what type of background they have, and then we will have the second polling question to give me a sense of why you're here. So it's actually like, who are you and what do you want? Poll to get a sense of who is here together. So let's go to the poll. The first one is, what kind of organization do you work for? That's what we want to know. And well, there are not that many government organizations I see on the poll. There are few government people here. There's a group other that is growing and reducing. Then the big organization that is quite well represented here is the inter or national NGO that's here. So it's the NGOs in the house. They want to know about shifting the power. Then we have civil society organizations or small NGOs. I wonder if perhaps maybe activists would fall under that. And I also really wonder what other is. But in any case, I have a sense of who is here. Who are you? You are mostly international NGOs. And then you are other. And then you are civil society organizations and small NGOs. And there's a small group of government organizations joining this conversation. So when we talk about shifting the power, this is a pretty interesting outcome, huh? I think if we want to know like who wants this, or in any case who's interested in this conversation, it's mostly the national and international NGOs who are interested. And then there's this wonderful group of other. Well, let's go on to our second polling question, which is, why are you participating in this webinar? What is it that you want? Who are you? You are NGOs, international NGOs, and what is it that you want? Why are you participating in this webinar? Is it because you're curious about the topic? Okay. Is it because we, an organization, do not feel the urgency, but we're curious, right? Is it because we don't work on this topic yet, but we feel that maybe we should, feel it's important? Or is it because we've taken the first steps in shifting power and we want to learn more? Or is it because we have a lot of experience and want to hear stories from like-minded organizations? So is it about learning from each other? Is it about figuring out what next now that you're on this shift, now that you're shifting, and then what? Or is it because you don't work on this yet, but you have this feeling it might be important? Or you're just curious? So, I mean, overwhelmingly, it seems that most of you are here because you say you've started the journey. You've started the journey, and you want to know what's next. You want to know what is next. And then some people, the next big group, the next largest group is the people who want to learn from each other. So hopefully we will get into these lessons. In all of the juicy conversations that we have, we will get into the lessons of what it's all about. But I mentioned a dream paper. So a dream paper has been developed that gives practical tips and tools. And this is what we'll be discussing with our 4 guests from all over the world. And we will, kind of all over the world, right? Yeah, we're all over the world, yes. But to start this conversation, I wanted to first go to our 2 speakers, Bart Romein, the director of Partos, and Moses Isoba. Moses, I hope I said your last name correctly, did I?
Yeah, you definitely deserve a gold medal. You've said it right.
Thank you. I'll be waiting for my medal. Thank you. And so I'll start with Bart, and then I'll bring you in, Moses. So, Bart, I've been talking about dream papers. And I mean, there's no better time to develop dream papers, right, than during a pandemic when most of us are at home. And I hope, have had the best sleep of our lives in the last 2 years. Maybe, maybe not. But can you tell us a little bit about why? Why did you develop this dream paper?
Yes, first, thank you very much for the opportunity. Firstly, and there's a number of triggers, and two you mentioned already. One was because of the community foundation said they noted that it was an important issue, that we really had to work on this. So thanks to them, I think that was an important trigger for us to start, and that was brought to us through Wilde Ganzen. The second one is that a lot of our members, we have about more than 100 member organizations, and they felt an increasing uneasiness in the relationships, in the partnerships, also in the systems they work with, deliberately and partly also unconsciously, being aware that there are differences in power, that there is unbalanced power, and which is hampering our work. Mm-hmm. And a third trigger was, were a number of movements. Think of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, decolonization of aid, and so I can name a few. And in fact, we see a lot of things happening now during the pandemic and reinforced. And all these movements, under the waves, have an undercurrent of anger, frustration, and resistance against misuse of power and unbalanced power. And I think that also was a very important trigger for us to start this. But there is also a bigger why, and that is that one of the key issues in development cooperation, and maybe the main issue, is dealing with power. Yeah. There's a lot of people that don't have access, that don't have any decision power about governance, resources, access to services, justice. And there is a limited group of actors that do have this access and that do have the say how to deal and how to manage, which is a root cause of many issues like misuse of natural resources, of poverty, exclusion, conflicts. So that's also the bigger question why we want to address the shift to power or sharing power and more balanced and more fairly shared power.
Yeah, so quite clearly there's a real signals that this is so urgent and so important, and that really the foundational issues are shaky, right? That you're facing certain foundational things like anger and frustration and misuse of power, which make it difficult for you to make the transformations that your organization.
And yes, so that's a big why. But at the same time, if we really want to make a genuine work, or when we want to make progress on that, we also have to look at ourselves. Mm-hmm. If we want to be credible in our efforts, we also our efforts, our organizations, our partnerships, our attitudes should reflect solidarity, equality, subsidiarity, and so on. And so I think that's also, and in fact, that's the very focus of this dream paper. So it's not a big dream about the whole world and big world system. It's about the system in which we work, in which we unconsciously and partly deliberately work within a system that consolidates unbalanced power.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, which I don't want us to get stuck on semantics, but what is the name of this system that you work? Is it development? Is it international cooperation? What would you call?
Well, the system of the dream paper, that's most important. But
that's what I mean.
What I call development cooperation is, in fact, in 3 pillars. It's aid, emergency aid, humanitarian aid. It's development cooperation. To support groups, and especially vulnerable groups, which are very powerful in their resilience. And thirdly, that's also looking at your own behavior as an actor, as an industry, as a country. What is your footprint on the rest of the world? Yeah. And diminish or reduce the negative aspects of that footprint and, increase or enhance the positive aspects. So that's, for me, totally the total of this sum is development cooperation, which is kind of guided by currently by the Sustainable Development Goals.
And that's what the dream paper is about.
We narrowed the dream paper. That was the first phase of the work of this community of practice, which consisted, by the way, of 135 people, so it's quite a community already. We described a more manageable system, and that's the system I was referring to, that many of the Dutch development organizations and quite a number of global and organizations from the Global South are working with. That's a subsidy scheme, or a policy scheme with a subsidy related to it, called power of voices,
Yeah.
which in itself is quite an innovative scheme because it leaves a lot of flexibility, and the key idea is, well, a shift of power, strengthening your partners. But at the same time, that same system contains a number of constraints, which, as I said, deliberately and partly unconsciously underscores the disbalance.
Yeah. Okay, so it's specifically about this power of voices structure, and there are 135 organizations or individuals, participants.
Individuals. So these are practitioners, experts from various countries. So it's quite a group. And then there were kind of 10 lead authors. Moses was one of them, and then some others, well, 9 others that really did the very writing. But the input was from these 135 people from all across the world, kind of facilitated under the name of a community of practice.
Community of practice, 135 people all around the world talking about this dream paper. So how are we going to shift power? And so that sounds like a very juicy topic for me in any case. I'm really curious, what stood out for you? What are some of the juicy bits? What are the things that really stood out for you in this process?
In the outcome of this
in the
process,
outcome. Yeah, in the outcome.
Well, there's many things, so let me just name 3.
Okay, thank you.
So first is that look at yourself, look at your own organization, look at the system you work in, that you, as I said, deliberately or unconsciously consolidate, and that triggers and strengthens the differences in power. We composed a kind of power awareness tool to have a kind of assessment of your own relationships, of your own organization, who's making the decisions, and is that well balanced? So that's one. So look at yourself, at your own organization and your relationships. That's the first kind of very strong recommendation that came out of these papers. The second one is, don't see relationships and partnerships, don't consider them as a kind of transactional thing. So there is a fund, there is a program, and you make your arrangements and you work within that program. So look at it from a larger picture. Don't start the relationship when there is a call for proposals. No, please build and invest in trust in the partnerships long time before and long time after. Yeah. And that's not only in terms of time, but also in terms of participants. Because normally when you have a kind of a subsidy scheme, there are the formal organizations that are the implementers. There's lead agency, there are other implementers. But there is, of course, a lot of other organizations, movements and so on. And if you don't relate to them, you will never achieve the change you want to. Yeah. So that was the second thing. So don't think in transactional terms, but think of transformative terms. And the third one, and I think you referred to that already, we need to look at our own language from many aspects. I was referring already to decolonization of aid. So we have a lot of terminology, we have perceptions that we know better than others and so on. And to be honest, I also very often think that I know things better than others. That's something intrinsic in me, that's intrinsic in organizations, and it's also part of the North-South relationships. The North knows better than the South. That's something that we have to realize and to get rid of. At the same time, so we have to look at language, terminology, but as you said, let's try to avoid that we bog down in semantics. Yeah. So let's really look at semantics in terms of how make it workable, what are the words that we should try to avoid, but not stick to the semantics, but walk the talk.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you have a dream paper, of course, the semantics are important. Like the language of a dream is perhaps what shapes reality. So, but then you have to move into reality. So it's a very, very interesting insights there. And I really would. Where can we find this dream paper?
Well, it's on the website of Partos.
Okay.
Partos. And if you go to that website, I don't have it in front of me, but I'm sure that at the very moment it's right on front at the homepage.
On the homepage, yeah. Okay, great. Because I'm sure that people would love to see this. And do you think that this is a growing important issue in the Dutch development sector at the moment?
Yes, for sure. And you saw it in the answers already of the participants. And by the way, it's a dream paper, so we we have to make it work. Let's keep dreaming, but also let's go to action. But it's a step. It's a long journey, internally as well as, well, the external journey is much longer and more challenging, of course. But it starts with our own internal journey, and it's just the first few steps which we took now, and so it's quite a way to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a great, bold steps that have been taken now together with the 135 organizations. For those of you who are watching from home, by the way, it's important to know that we're, recording this. And if you are maybe distracted or you can't watch the whole thing, or it's so fascinating to you, you want to share it with someone, it will be shared later. And I know Moses wants to be a superstar, so this is your chance. I heard more than 400 people who signed up, and it will be shared and watched. So if you Moses, if you want to be famous, this, your fame is shining, is coming your way. Moses, you participated in this process of the dream papers. Why did you participate in it?
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I participated in this for two reasons. I mean, in the Global South, where resources are very scarce, we've been brought up with a common dictum that you might be poor, your shoes might be broken, but your mind is your royal palace. And therefore, we like to exercise your mind as your royal palace and think through. And then also, the reason I was really attracted to this dreaming all these scenarios is because, in many countries in the Global South, we are working in a constricted civic space. And as civil society actors, we always say that, you can, while other things are being, criminalized, thinking is not yet illegal. Dreaming is not yet illegal. So we dream. And so that's why I really felt that this was something I needed to be part of.
No, that's really beautiful. So in a way, you also say that this thinking and dreaming is in a way an equalizer, because that's free and is not yet illegal. You never know who knows the future. But at the moment, it's something that we can all do, right? We can still think and we can dream. So that's and so what were for you some of the most important insights from this process and from the paper, or maybe conclusions or insights?
I think for me, really, the most important aspect that, first of all, the process and making sure that this was a process for co-creation between the southern civil society actors and northern civil society actors. That for me really, stood out quite, strongly. It was not one of those days when we receive, articles, papers written from the north and then downloaded in the south. So this was an opportunity that we could actually, as southern practitioners, we could have our thoughts into the paper. And for each of the papers, there are about, I think, 4 papers that are put together. One looking at partnerships, one looking at resource mobilization, one looking at strategy, and one looking at communication. The writing was paired. We had, somebody from the south co-authoring it with somebody from the north. So that for me, as just as a process in itself, it is something that I think was quite very good for me. But then, besides the process, when you look at each of these different papers that together been synthesized into one, I mean, it was each of them really brings out very, very unique aspects. I mean, for instance, if you just take the partnership paper, I mean, the fact that we're able to go back and forth and see what is it we're talking about. Are we talking about funding relationship, or are we talking about partnerships? Because I think what we do have right now from the southern perspective are funding relationships. We haven't yet reached to talk about partnerships. But even when we were really discussing these papers, we even went further that maybe what we should be dreaming about is not even a partnership, but a collaboration. Because from the collaboration, there's going to be contestation. Because oftentimes when we talk about partnership, we assume it's a plane, everything is equal. But yet in this kind of relations, there's going to be contestation. And in a collaboration, you kind of like have the push and pull, which is always going to be there. So that for me, really, in that paper, stood out quite strongly. But even more challenging is in the communication, the language that we use. Language is really what determines our thinking, our being, and our thinking itself. And actually, language sets the terms for relational engagement. And so we, in the development arena, language determines so much. Even when we talk about shifting power, there is language. When we talk about sharing power, there is language. And I mean, we often hear our northern brethren, when they come to the south, they say they are going to the field. And one wonders, whose field are you going to? And what is a field anyway? If you're in Amsterdam, perhaps your backyard could be the field. So when you come to visit in Uganda, why are you saying you are coming to the field? What are you coming to do at the field? Are you coming to dig? What is it exactly? So there's a whole aspect of language. I think that was, for me, stood out very strongly.
What would you propose? I like this. I like this example that you raise about field.
Yeah.
What is it? It's not field. It is just what should we call it?
Well, I mean, I think we have to start by asking, why are we then calling it a field?
Yeah.
I mean, why are we calling it a field? I mean, this is the people's, places where they live every day. This is what they do every day. And so, one wonders why, when somebody from Amsterdam comes to Africa, is coming to the field. And when I'm coming from the south to go to The Hague, I'm not going to the field.
No.
I mean, I've never seen a southern practitioner going to the field in Brussels. No. And one wonders whether there are no fields there. I think it's really about, the language determining the modus operandi, the language being used in a manner that is not condescending, the language being used in a manner to depict equality. There is no field. There are really human beings out there.
Yeah.
And it's not a field. There are human beings out there who are struggling to address issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
That really stood out for me quite strongly.
Yeah. I thank you so much for this. This is incredibly enriching, this conversation already, raising this issue of this robust process of partnering going, between, what we call global north and global south. I think also that we have to really wonder about this. And really looking at things like collaboration, so really getting into the ring, not this assumption of equality, which masks a lot of things, but getting into the ring. Collaboration is where the contestation will come out, and also then in that collaboration you can wonder about these types of concepts like field. What is field? But as you were talking, I'm also wondering, were there blind spots? Were there things that you were missing in the dream paper, in the process, perhaps that you wish was more in it or was not in it at all after you saw the whole? Sometimes we need to see the whole before we can see what's missing.
Yeah, I think the foundational preposition of the dream paper is to be able to paint fairly with a broad brush the kind of civil society that we want to see. Just from the polling question, you said, where do you come from? And, there is INGO, it's a cluster on its own. And then I saw you actually putting civil society organizations. And I was wondering, who are INGOs? Aren't they part of civil society? So again, I think what the foundational preposition here is to be able to have the civil society that we want. And whether that would be inhabited by northern global actors who call themselves international INGOs. I don't know, if I had an organization in Uganda and for some reason I was working out of Amsterdam, whether I would actually call myself international NGO, because for some reason I've flown from Uganda. So what is international about this? But I think one of the things that, to answer your question really directly, one of the things that I really found missing is that, I don't see the voices of the people, because, the theater of activity for development is with the people. And it's such that the people who know the solution to their problem, I always want to put a high premium on the subsidiarity principle, that those closest to the problem know the solution. But, once again, we are dreaming, and we are dreaming without the people. And therefore, we're trying to build, to paint with a broad brush the kind of civil society that we want to have. But again, it is me, it is Bart, it is these 135 practitioners. And yes, they have a connection with the communities. This is a communal practice. But I think we are lacking that connection, or we are lacking that voice from the people. And I think we need to be able to tap into that richness. We need to be able to see how we can be able to harness that richness of these voices, because that is the theater of activity.
Thank you so much for this critical reflection. Bart is still nodding, so he's happy with your reflections. I do think it's quite an important issue and quite a blind spot, right? So we are all in our different positions in our organizations working with, for people, and yet you are saying the voice of people, it's still not close enough to the people, the theater of activity, as you call it. So I wonder what that means then. What needs to happen? What can we do with this blind spot? But maybe we can save that for later. There are a couple of questions. I think it's good for you to know that your questions will come in here on this iPad. So I will handle these questions. But I would like to move from you, Moses. We'll come back to you. Don't go anywhere. To two of our other speakers, Zora Mosa and Maite Smet. And from now on, I will just use your first names. Zora and Maite, are you there? Yes, there's Zora. Yeah, and I see Maite, really great that you are joining us, and really seeing the three of you on one screen is actually really important, because it's the next part of my screen says it's 4:30, and of course each of you are in different, it's a different time wherever you are, and so the importance of perspective, right? When we talk about shifting power, when we talk about any problem, anything, your perspective on it can be so different, even though we're looking at exactly the same thing. So what I wanted to ask you is, what are let's just start with some of your reflections on the dream paper. Maybe we'll just start with you, Maite, since you're the biggest on my screen at the moment. Do you want to share some of your reflections about the dream paper?
Sure. Thank you, Amma, and also thanks to Wilde Ganze and vice versa for organizing this event. I mean, reflections on the dream paper, I think from at least from our side, or from where I'm standing from, the idea of what does this look like in practice. So I think what the dream paper does provide is good intentions and good thinking about what this could look like. But what I'm lacking a little bit as well is, what does this look like in practice, right? And knowing that there are many initiatives out there that are already doing this type of work, that are already challenging the traditional models of what you call quote unquote development cooperation and aid. For example, there's a lot of things that are out there. GAGA, so the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, which is the alliance that I'm coordinating, is one of them, and I'm happy to speak more about it. But also thinking about other models, such as Leading from the South, which is also funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's a new alliance of environmental justice funds in the Global South, for example, even the Global Fund for Community Foundations. So these are organizations that are already thinking about these topics and these issues. It's been before the Shift the Power movement, and they're going to keep talking about it. And so what I'm lacking, and maybe linked to what Moses had brought forward, is that where are those voices and where are those reflections? Also recognizing that these are the same mechanisms and models that can actually reach a lot of the communities and local movements that are missing in this paper, right? So how do we reach that? How do we work with that? So that would be my first reflection on that.
Yeah, well, I think that's immediately, building on what Moses was saying, and very, very important. None of us can operate in a vacuum, right? There's so much going on, and it's so important to stay connected. Zora, would you like to share some of your reflections or thoughts on the dream paper?
Yeah, sure. So thank you also for the organizers of this event for the chance to actually have this conversation. You mentioned, Amma, right at the beginning about how much effort was put into this. And I think for me, it's quite important to acknowledge that. For me, the dream paper is a signal about a readiness by the sector and the Dutch development sector to actually start to contend with these issues, have these conversations. The amount of time and energy that was put into having the dialogues, developing the thinking, producing this paper shows that people are prepared to put resource actually into also thinking about this. And I really appreciated some parts of the paper, for example, the section on advocacy, talking about the role of Dutch NGOs in challenging Northern decision makers about problems that were created in the North that are impacting disproportionately in the South. So there's actually quite some good content in the paper that it's worth getting to grips with. I also think the dream paper offers a kind of common starting point for us. It's a kind of line in the sand, right? Like, we're here, we're starting this conversation, it's real, it's tangible, and it is happening. There's a kind of commitment to change that comes with, and it's a commitment that I trust because of how the paper was developed and the fact that it's also being launched in the way that it is, and we're having this conversation. And of course, I think there is still room to develop it further. Yeah. And I would say, actually, now that we're in 2022 and the last couple of years, what's been happening in the world, for me, what it signals is I believe we actually have the knowledge and the experience collectively to go much, much further with this paper, in this paper. And I believe that we actually can do it. I think we can radically transform the system because we've already shown that we're extremely adaptable throughout the pandemic. So there's really no need to limit our ambition on this topic. And I think for me, we talked a little about language, right? Colonial, neo-colonial mindsets, the need to decolonize that, and the desire to move from vertical to horizontal. And so I would look at kind of some of the language that still sits in this paper. And if you look at, for example, there's a section on fundraising, on resource mobilization, and it talks about how Northern NGOs can help Southern NGOs, and Southern NGOs can help Southern CBOs, community-based organizations. So there's still an idea about who's supposed to be helping whom. That's a kind of downward train and has certain folks at the top and others at the bottom, that I think just reflects the fact that many of the people who wrote this paper were still in the system. Yeah. And it's very challenging, right, to kind of be critical about a thing that you're invested in, that you're benefiting from, that is your day-to-day operation, that you're kind of so locked into the logics, it can be very hard to step outside that. And I think we underestimate sometimes that it's going to be a painful process, actually, to look at shifting the power. These are nice words: shifting power, sharing power, transforming power. What does it actually mean in practice? It can mean that we have to give up something. It can mean that we lose power, that we give up control. Some of our organizations might need to get smaller. Some of us may lose our jobs. And that's the consequence of some of these conversations. But I also think that that's why we're here. You don't join the development sector for the for the status and the glory necessarily, right? You're in it because it's a cause. You believe in it. You're trying to make the world a better place. You want there to be more justice and joyfulness in the world, and you're kind of passionate about that and doing everything you can to make that a reality.
Yeah.
So I think we can also kind of start from there. Where are we trying to go, and what would it take to get even more critical with ourselves about what's possible and what can be done?
I think these are such wonderful reflections from all of you, and I want to thank you for your the really good critical reflections that I am sure Bart and the team of 135 people who worked on this can really use and really absorb into this. And I wonder, Zora, as we move on into, I will take a few questions and then we move on into the panel. If you can give us a sense of what it would mean to go further, because you say, well, we are ready, we have the knowledge, we have the experience, we're talking about this, we can go further, we can radically transform the system. It means that we are sort of at this summit, let's say, and I don't mean it as a conference, but like at the top, so we're ready. So what is your dream then? What does it look like for you if you say this, just to challenge you a little bit?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
not a challenge at all.
So we were talking about power of voices, right? As the particular framework we're talking about to kind of make the system a bit smaller. We're talking about let's say a set subsidy from the government, the Dutch government, and a set number of organizations, right? So that we can at least make this a little bit more manageable as an idea about, what are we shifting? If we look at what came before power of voices, the subsidy that existed before and the partnerships that came out of that, there were 25. Only one of those was led from the Global South, and that's Gaga, which Maite is representing. Then we had Power of Voices, which we're in now, the follow-up subsidy. And out of 20 partnerships, so the number of partnerships went down from 25 to 20, there are now 2 partnerships that are led from the Global South. So in the first one, 4% of partnerships, 1 out of 25, was led from the Global South. In the second one, 10%, 2 out of 20 are led from Global South. I really hope my math is right. That's not my strongest point. And so I would say going further, the next round of subsidies, what if we aim for, at a minimum, 50% being led from the Global South?
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So these are nice words, but when you look at the numbers, if every 5 years we only get 1 more, or we could see it as doubling, but that's still too slow.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a much more drastic shift in the next subsidy round.
Yeah, and I think this is really, really wonderful because actually Moses, Maite, and Zora, you're all saying that we need to really connect with what's going on. What is the reality of the people, who are the people, what are their realities, and that we are ready, we can really indeed make a shift from a 10% to a 50% representation of organizations that are led from the Global South, and that alone would be such a great reflection on shifting the power, that really literally shifting the power in a way that is meaningful to the people who are in the theater of activity, as Moses so beautifully put it. I have a few questions here, so I want to ask you those questions, and then we will move on into the panel to really explore together, like what is it that we can do ourselves, and what is it that has to happen in the system, and what does that look like? Who are we in the system? I love these types of conversations. So let's start first with you, Bart. One of the questions that came in is, why should shift the power transition take so long? Why is it a long journey? Because I guess it's also a little bit linked to what Zora is saying. We are kind of ready. It doesn't have to be that long for certain shifts, but why do you say that it is a long journey? We know what should happen, so why can't we plan it and do it in 1 or 2 years? If it takes a long time, not much will change. I don't know who asked the question, but it's from the chat.
Yeah. Well, maybe I might give a very personal answer to this. Mm-hmm. When I had my first job in 1980, that was with Greenpeace. And we said, give us your 10 guilders a year and we do the work. And now we call our constituency, we call it our support base. So people are considered to be supporters of the corporate interests. And I think that's part of our system. And that's not just the North-South dichotomy, but also I call it the corporate civil society divide.
Yeah.
So we have corporate interests. And I think a lot of these interests are legitimate. However, I think they are quite a stand in the way of these changes that Maite and Zora and Moses were referring to. I think the key question, of course, we have to look at our own systems, but the key question is how can we unleash and how can we leverage civil societies connecting, co-creative, countervailing power? And yes, there we also have to rethink the division of roles, of corporates, of civil society at large. I referred in the beginning already to movements. If I give an example, and it didn't end very well, but if you might remember the Arab Spring in Tunisia, there was a great uproar, but it only catalyzed into a change of the how do you call the basic law of a country,
Constitution?
Constitution. They changed the constitution because of a cooperation between the civil society uproar leaders and a number of institutions, like a number of legal activists, a labor union and civil society organization, because they could catalyze this. And this is a kind of thing we have to learn from. And there is many examples. I might refer to other examples, and also Zora referred to already. I think we have to learn from that. But we have to, the key question is not so much, let's not focus too much on, how do you call it in English? Navel staring? So let's look at what we want at the end. And in the end, we want to unleash and harness and leverage civil society's power. So that should be the main consideration, because only then you can change the bigger system. And therefore, looking at our smaller system is very important, but also with this bigger challenge in mind.
But
the
why,
corporate interests stand in the way of these changes. Therefore, it takes so long. It's very easy to talk about others, but if you don't change your own systems, and that's what we see in every sector, we always talk about change with the others, and we know how it should be, and we act how it should be. So there's also a kind of intrinsic constraint in the elite and corporate entities, our members. Myself, I'm heading an entity, an elite, and that's really an issue we have to address and to realize and to be aware of.
But so you do, I mean, don't spend too much time looking at yourself, but you do have to do this self-reflection and realize that you're not in a void and that there are all these other interests, and that's why it takes so long. That's why you can't just make a plan and do it in a year or two and then it's done. So I hope that answers the question. And I mean, this is quite a delicate and complex issue, but definitely not the type of complexity that you say, it's complex, never mind. It's rather, it's complex, get involved. So thank you for that. Moses, there's a question here for you. It says, how can we assure that voices from the community members that we say we work with or for are more reflected in these kinds of conceptual, system-focused questions? So maybe the question is also a little bit, so why is this even a blind spot? How could we have done this? How could we have gotten the voices of the people in the theater of activity, as you put it? How could we have gotten their voices in?
Okay, thank you. I think that two ways of doing this. Right now in the current configuration, we have the INGOs with their country office model, which for some time I think it's not a good model. It's like a colonial outpost of some sort. But I mean, that said, it is still there. And these country office models, their operations are with the communities. And I think if we were intentional, we can actually be able to go into these communities where we are working and be able to start, cataloging exactly what is it that people are saying to us in terms of what is it that they see, development. And, we need to go there devoid of development jargons. We need to go there with the willingness to listen. And as I say, you always listen with 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use those in the ratio that God gave it to us, 2 to 1. You do the more of listening than the talking. And I think if we did that, and if we are really intentional, the voices are often clear. It is quite palpable. But because we go in like development tourists in the communities, we drive in, we drive out. When we want to go into the communities, we give it names like a community immersion. We go with the mosquito repellents. We go with mineral water, bottled mineral water. We cannot blend in. And when we do not blend in, we can, the communities look at us suspiciously, and therefore we cannot be able to gather these voices and be able to bring them up into the dreaming. So, it is possible to gather these voices, but that will start with a mindset change of ourselves. Are we willing to be able to spend time in the communities, and we go and be with the communities, not go in, go out, or go in the communities and really drive out in the evening because you want to return to the capital where you feel comfortable. But that said, and I just really want to add on something to Bart has just said. Why this is a process, it's a journey, and it's going to take some time, because what we are suggesting in the dream papers and what for us would be a measure of success would, we are looking for a systemic change. We're looking for a systemic change. And I think if you wanted to do this quick, like in 1 year, you could easily shock the system. And if you shock the system, definitely you're going to create a crisis of sorts. And also we don't need to be naive. Truth be told, that in the current system as it is, there are people that are feeding off the system. And so if you quickly just say, look, a change must happen now, and we must take a 360-degree or 180 turn, you're going to shock the system. And I think that would instead of create a crisis. So I think it's good to be a little bit, if you want to have a systemic change, to kind of be process by process, where we are able to let people get a mindset change, to be able to know that, yes, it is possible, that, you can share power, or you can have a power transformation, because, that's what we need to do. I fear a situation where we did a power shift, and we took power from the north and concentrated it in the south. If we did, then there's going to be a shift to the power 2.0. Yeah. Where this time they shift to the power 2.0, it will be the north saying, no, there's too much power in the south. We need it in the north. And so we need to avoid the shift to power 2.0.
Yeah. You're all touching on very important things. So we need radical change, but it doesn't need to be shocking that just causes just one extreme to the other. And actually, in terms of the question about speed, Zora also beautifully talked about how even in the effort of talking about shifting the power, there's still in the language, in the paper, you can see how difficult it is to step out. So the good intentions are there, some people are involved, but yet a certain language still reflects a certain vertical relationship. And so this is a slow process, because a lot of the times we don't even know that we're doing this. And one of the ways that we can bridge this problem is to indeed use the 2 ears, 1 mouth rule. So listen more, talk less, pay attention, and trust the process. It needs to be slow. And at the same time, it's urgent. So we need to find the balance in this. Times are urgent. Slow down is what this psychologist says, Bayo Akomolafe. Slow down even though it's urgent. And that's a difficult balance to manage. Now, I think everybody has had an opportunity to speak. And I have more questions here, but I also see the clock. So I'm going to move quickly into the panel. And in this panel, I want us to explore 2 main questions. One is, what can I do? What can we do? And then what needs to change in the system that we find ourselves a part of, right? So that's what the panel will be. And then I'll go back to some of these questions after that. Panelists, I said to you earlier that I can't see the 3 of you at the same time, but luckily we have excellent technical support, so now I can see all of you. I thought I should let you know. Let's start just simply, as a question. What can you yourself do as a person from your position or your role in the current system? So we say the system is not quite right, it's not quite working for us, but a lot of us, there's a certain awareness and a willingness to change things. Maybe I'll start with Bart, because I think Bart might have been quietest the longest now. So, Bart, what is it that we can do ourselves? What can we do ourselves to change?
Well, one thing which is within our reach is looking at our own membership, our own organizations, and I think we have to learn from the best examples, because it's not something new. There is a lot of good examples in a number of examples we heard already, so that's one. There's another one, and we didn't talk about money, but money is a very important driver of this cooperation, and in fact also a very important cause of a lot of these unbalanced things. And I think that I refer to the Power of Voices subsidy scheme, and I really am serious when I'm saying this is a very progressive, novel scheme.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have to deal with the accountability. And the accountability is decided upon by the Court of Auditors. And it's not decided on normative, on change considerations. It's really based on considerations of control, of risk avoidance. And I think this is really something that is hampering a lot of good relationships. It hampers trust building, it hampers long-term relationships, because these program cycles are always 5 years. We had just an example of Zora. This current 5 year, it's 5 year that ends, and then it ends. So I think we really have to to think hard and to work hard to change transactional financial accountability, risk accountability into what let me call it transformative accountability, providing for adaptivity, for flexibility, for really equal say in partnerships. At this current scheme again asked to have a lead agency, and this lead agency has subcontractors, and they have all kind of bureaucratic accountability obligations. And I saw an example of about the 20 protocols which people have to relate to, and the subcontractors, they also have to fill in. So at the end you end up with capacity building to be able to answer the bureaucratic requirements instead of working on system change. So I think this is really that we together with the ministry, and I know there's a lot of people that see this constraint. I think we can change this, and not just for this very scheme. I think we could really think, and we should work hard for the broader donor scheme, the bilateral foundations, and so to really rethink accountability, because I think that's one of the major constraints in equal and fairly shared and flexible adaptive partnerships.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I've heard so much about these systems that just I don't know really how to concisely say it, but that don't seem to work, because you have to build a capacity to be, you're just never getting to, and actually these systems stand in the way of building trust and of being collaborative and building real partnerships that are based on trust. So that's a really important point that you raise, is really address this system that is standing in the way. And I wanted to go to Zora and Maite specifically, because in this conversation, it's kind of clear that you are, Gaga was one organization, Global South organization, that did become part of this program. From your position, from your organization, what do you think that we can do ourselves to make this transformation, to make this shift? Maybe we'll start with you, Maite. And you could maybe relate your answer a little bit to your work at Gaga, so we get more sense of what that is.
Sure. Sorry, I was just checking if I was muted or unmuted, just trying to be responsible for that. No, yeah, indeed, I think it would be really great to bring in some of the reflections that we've had as a model of collaboration that from the beginning strategically and politically committed to doing something differently. So not only are we being led by an organization that is in the Global South, so the Fondo Centroamericano de Mujeres, which is a regional women's fund, which has been founded, based in, and is working in Central America, is financially and legally responsible for the Gaga partnership towards the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That in itself, as Bart was saying, is quite a feat, because we have so many protocols and all the requirements just to be able to be that lead organization is challenging. And it requires an investment of time and resources. And to be honest, not many Global South organizations have that. So that is something to keep in mind when we're talking about this. But the other side is also about creating space for co-collective creation, right? So this idea of how do we bring in other voices, particularly voices that are most excluded. So it's not only about talking about Global South communities, but talking about women, Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant communities, people with disabilities, the LGBTQI plus communities. So that is also talking about power, right? So why aren't they part of these conversations? And so when we were thinking about the Gaga program under the Power of Voices policy framework, we really took the time to work with our partners. So we took a year to really design a co-creation process where we were able to involve at different stages the partner funds, so women's funds and environmental justice funds and NGOs that are part of our program, but also the community-based organizations that are receiving Gaga funding. So we really wanted to have their perspectives at the local, regional level to be part of this program. And I think that in itself creates already this shift in design. Because another thing that I wanted to highlight is that receiving funding gives power, right? Whether you're in the Global North or you're in the Global South. So this idea of recognizing that you have power just because you hold the funds is part of this. We have to challenge that. You have to start saying, let's take a step back. It might be uncomfortable, but it's really about saying, how can we get other people to be part of this design process? And there is one more thing that I wanted to highlight, and maybe it's not a first step, but it's really about, is this about sharing power or creating more equal and balanced relationships? Or is it really about giving power, giving resources and space to these communities that have been historically excluded, right? So we need to recognize that. And I think as organizations in the Global North are thinking about that, I think it's also important to realize that these same discussions are happening within movements, within communities, and within organizations across the globe. Power dynamics happen in different stages and in different phases. So it's really important to know that this power dynamic is really happening everywhere. And one more thing that I wanted to highlight is, I think, yes, slow, but oh my, it's urgent, right? So we are facing a pandemic, we're facing a climate crisis, social crises across the board. Why do we go slow? This is requiring really a shift, and I would really invite us to be bolder in that sense.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for bringing these perspectives in, and also asking this question: is it about sharing power? Or is it about creating a more balanced power situation, giving power to people who have been historically excluded? And indeed, I mean, these things are pretty complex. Like when we want to, speed seems to be quite a topic. People are asking about, why can't it be faster? Can it go faster? But then Moses is also highlighting, you know, it can go faster, but sometimes when you go very fast, it can be very radical, and that can be quite destructive. So, you know, that's... yeah, maybe, I don't know, Zora, would you like to add something here in terms of also your experience at Mama Cash and the role we ourselves have in creating this shift or share of power?
Sure, yeah. So maybe first just on timing and speed and pace. And I appreciated Moses' point that it can be a shock to the system. But I do also want to just pick up the word you just used, Amma, where you said, you know, it could be destructive if we move too fast. I think we need to check whether, is it destructive or disruptive? And something can be disruptive and be shocking for the system and be good for it. But, you know, that's the dialogue, that's the conversation, and kind of, who, if we take longer, who benefits and who does it harm in the meantime? So Mama Cash gets asked a lot about kind of our opinion on this, and I could go on and on about how things should be. But you're right to kind of also ask us, well, what are we doing, right? And Bart's point about we have to look at ourselves. So indeed, we do look at ourselves in Mama Cash, but what can we do? In the middle of telling everybody else what they could do, what can we do also? So we took the challenge up and we looked at who has decision-making power in the organization about grants. So Mama Cash is an international women's fund. We make grants to feminist activists around the world. And those decisions were being made by staff. And so we were looking at other funds where the people receiving the grant money, communities and activists who were receiving it, were making the decision, and we weren't doing that. And so we looked at ourselves and go, so we talk a good talk. Why aren't we doing this too? Why is it that staff make those decisions? So we decided to flip it. And as of last year, we are what's called participatory, completely participatory, which means that the people who would be receiving the grant funding, the groups and activists that receive the funding from us, they're the ones making the decisions on the grants. Staff are no longer making the decisions about who we partner with and how much they receive funding. Those decisions are now made by community members and community activists. And what I can say is that it took 2 years to actually figure out how to do this and build and design and go through the logistical complexity of actually shifting our whole internal system to be able to do that. But the hardest part was actually taking the decision. Mm-hmm. After that, we got some pushback from folks like our donors. We had donors who were asking us questions like, who's making the decision? What do you mean? Is that risky? And that's pretty scary, I have to say, as someone who's trying to lead an organization. When your donor starts asking you pretty fundamental questions like that, that's not easy to just kind of grit your teeth and go through it. I had colleagues who were like, what does this mean for my job? But still, we were able to pull this off over 2 years of working on it because we sat down to make the decision together. Once the decision was made, everything else was difficult, disruptive, but not destructive. In the end, we came up with a model that we have had extremely positive feedback about, that our staff, our colleagues, my colleagues are really happy about. The feedback we got from the community members that we're working with, the activists that we're working with, was extremely positive. They were so excited. They were like, this is amazing. How can we help? And we've also been able to increase the dialogue with donors about why this matters and why shifting the power and sharing the power in this way really matters. Yeah. So it's our first year of doing it. We've now been live with it for 1 year. So we're doing, all the evaluations and reflections. And of course, we made mistakes along the way, and there are things to learn. So there's nothing perfect about it. But I have to say that the difficult step was really taking the decision that we were going to give up power here. We were going to give up decision-making power, which also means control. I went from being the person who made the final approval on every single grant that Mama Cash makes to having strangers make those decisions for me. And that's not easy. But once we made the decision, the rest of it was like, all right, let's do this. And it's been a wonderful, amazing experience.
Oh, thank you so much for illustrating your point so wonderfully with your work. So really, from this idea of being bold, being disruptive, not destructive, and letting go of power and allowing what needs to happen, and just leading by example, because now it sounds like you have an example that a lot of organizations will want to learn from. And maybe before we go on to the next question, I do want to go back to Moses and ask what he thinks about what he's just heard about making radical change and bold choices and relatively quickly. If you have anything to add about what you said about shock, making things shocking.
I mean, in principle, I agree that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to be able to change things during our lifetime. We can't afford the luxury of passing over to another generation. And therefore, there's going to be need for us to make decisions and make them quick. So that's fine. I mean, I agree entirely. It's okay to be disruptive. It's okay to be able to shock the system. The system will be shocked. But with that said, I think this is something that has been on for a long time.
Yeah.
As I said, people feeding off this. It's about power and privilege that is in the north, and it's going to take time. I mean, many of the INGOs in the north are stewards of the northern taxpayers' money, and so it's not going to be something that can just change, and with just in a split of a second. So the change is there. We need it, but we need a bit of gradual. And I also I subscribe to the thesis that while the INGO has received a fair share of criticism, some of it is fair, some of it is unfair. I think it is important that we know that if tomorrow, God forbid, the INGO died and we didn't have anything, then the conversation would be completely different. But I think I agree that, yes, we need to quickly do this. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I think the people really, all of us living now and having this discussion, this is an opportunity to have something that can be written on our tombstones, that here lies the man, here lies the woman who was able to change the system that for quite a long time had defeated development.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a really wonderful tombstone, to have a wonderful epitaph on a tombstone. I do still have a question, and there are questions coming in. So what I would like to do is ask just this last round of questions, and then I'll go to the questions from the people who have joined us online. But we've been talking a little bit about what we need to do for change, but we also said earlier that we don't operate in a vacuum. So it might be good to spend a little bit of time reflecting on what needs to change in the system. So what change is needed in the system to create an enabling environment for new partnership building between NGOs in the global north and the global south. And some things have come up already. What some of these changes need to be, it really in what we call accountability and the system. Well, I don't know. There must be another word to use when we talk about system, because system seems to be this blanket that covers so much that sometimes we don't really know what we're talking about. But what needs to change in the system to create this shift? And I think I'll start with you, Bart, so that. And then I'll go back to the online. Yeah. So what do you think needs to change in the system after having done this dream paper and having looked at this, and of course with a wealth of experience?
To be very brief, I think if there is one shift, we have to shift from donor-driven development to people's-driven development. I think that's the whole key thing what we are discussing here. And let me stick it to there.
Yeah, that's what Zora also is exemplifying. Yeah.
And I think in that respect, I think the negotiating power, and I don't believe in localization, because we have to deal with a lot of global issues like climate change and so on. So localization is one, but you need global cooperation.
Yeah.
But I think the negotiating power of local groups, whatever they are, I think that's key in here. I once experienced in one country of Bhutan, which had 8 national parks, and each of these parks had a different management system because it had 8 different donors. It had the FAO for sustainable timber exploitation, it had the US Wildlife Service for nature protection, it had the Dutch for integrated conservation and development programs. So they had 8 different systems. So what they did, they merged their ideas, they came up with a common vision, a national vision on their asset, their natural asset, and that really made them strong in their negotiating power to all those donors. And they needed to coordinate the donors. And I still that thing on all levels, when you refer to multinational financials in their structural adaptation plans, as well as to bilateral donors, as well as to NGOs. I think that really we have to support each other in our negotiating power towards donor-driven versus the donor-driven development.
Yeah. No, this really it builds a lot on what Zora was saying earlier. Maybe Zora, you want to add? Do you have anything you'd like to add in terms of what needs to change in the system being this far along, let's say, in the process, what do you think still needs to, I mean, so much still needs to change, but what would you say needs to change?
Yeah, it's a rather grand question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I would start with something a little bit more simple, which is who's leading and who's following.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about kind of fundamental shifts in the system, it's about whose ideas do we listen to, whose knowledge bases do we trust, where do we get our advice and intelligence and information from. And so I would look at that a little bit and think about also on, I think Moses and Maite also both mentioned this as well, kind of instead of asking, for example, Global South actors to comment on our papers, we can start reading their papers because that work exists. There is leadership in the South already, a number of initiatives around how to shift the power, around what needs to change in the development system. We don't need to keep creating our own papers and conferences, and we can start showing up to theirs.
Yeah, well, I think this is also an important theme next to speed is also really don't operate in a void, right? Like really this huge important blind spot that seems to be so difficult to overcome. Read the papers that exist. Let's not pretend that there is no movement in the Global South, that there is no shift already going on, or that there are no thoughts on what that shift means. So show up for the Global South also when they have their conferences, when they present their papers, and give feedback on that. That's a really practical point. Maite, what would you, this big question, how would you bring it back to Gaga and your experiences? What do you think needs to happen to change the system? And you talked a little bit already about your relationship with the Women's Fund and how that makes things difficult for you. But perhaps there are more non-procedural things that need to happen.
No, I think one of the things that I would like to highlight is that, and I think this builds on Zora's point, is this idea that we need to be able to build relationships of trust, and these have to be long-standing relationships going beyond a project or a specific funding project, right? So this is one of the nice experiences that we've had with Gaga. So we are able to work in 28 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and really support community-based organizations and local movements in those spaces with flexible funding, but also capacity strengthening support. And we're able to do that because we have these relationships with funds and NGOs who are from the movements, are rooted there, and know the context very well. So this idea of trust, read their papers, know that their knowledge is there. That's what really should be driving our work, right? Yeah. And so this doesn't mean, and I do want to highlight this doesn't mean that Global North organizations don't have a role. To be honest, from my work in Gaga, I have seen and learned how important it is to strengthen global movements and work collectively to transform these systems that we're challenging. And this is where Global North organizations definitely have a role, because you have, well, we also, I'm part of that as well, have access, privilege, and power to decision-making spaces and processes, and particularly in your own countries, that are directly impacting the communities in the Global South. So all the communities themselves and their lives, but also our environment, right? So what are we doing regarding climate change? So I actually invite Global North organizations to create space, work in coordination with affected communities, make others listen, and actually really demand transformational change. Yeah. That's the role of Global North organizations.
Well, that's thank you so much for that, because that also answers one of the questions that was on my list, so that reduces the pressure on us a little bit in terms of answering questions from the audience. And I think that's also a very concrete proposal, really, like what can the Global North do? Well, a lot, right? The North has so much to do in brokering decision-making power and creating space and coordinating. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you for that. Now, Moses, I have here that in a recent interview, you said that if Western NGOs don't transform, that they will cease to exist. These are pretty prophetic, this is quite a prophetic statement. What did you mean when you said that? Is there anything you want to share with us about this? And what does that then mean? How should they then transform?
I think basically the wind of change is blowing, and the northern NGOs, as some people have said in other circles, have got on the three options. One is transform. The second one is die well. The last one is die badly. So I think transformation is really for the northern NGO is like plan A and is plan B. And I think increasingly the southern NGOs are starting to challenge the power and privilege that the northern NGOs have. I think increasingly we see that there are voices in the south that feel that no, this cannot continue and therefore needs to be challenged. And so the northern NGO will have to change. Otherwise, if it doesn't change, it would be forcefully changed, or its chances of existence will reduce. Also, I say that because I know that, as Bart has said, that money has been a really key driver that has been really saddling this power and privilege. But I think, the COVID-19 has also reduced finances in the north, and also the populist leaders, the nationalists, inward leaders that are emerging in Europe. Definitely meaning that there's going to be less and less money are available for charity, and so that power is also going to diminish. And so with that, it's better that actually we look at transformation now rather than actually wait for the catastrophe of death.
Yeah.
But one other thing that I can quickly chip in terms of what really needs to be changed. From where I sit, I think that education is the opportunity equalizer. And so for that, really, we need to be looking at whose knowledge are we putting a premium on. And I think for quite a long time, the knowledge of development has been shaped from the global north. I think it is right. It's now the time that we can actually be able to take advantage of the knowledge in the south. And there's quite a huge pool of knowledge. As I think I said in that interview, that we need to take a departure from what is currently the ivory tower type of knowledge to the ebony tower type of knowledge. And that in itself would start creating a huge change. And in terms of actually, shifting the power dynamics.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. Indeed, we can discuss should we change? But as you say, Moses, the winds of change are blowing. It's happening. There are certain political systems that are causing the change. You can wise up to it, act on what you know and with the foresight that presents itself, or you can wait and cease to exist. So, and there's so much going on in these shifts that there's a huge opportunity to transform now. So thank you all for this. Now, I want to do, I have all these questions here, and I want to not ignore them, but I also know that we're over time. So, do you have more time, a few more minutes? Maite, Moses, and Zora, and Bart? Yes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the questions that I have here on the screen, and then you can answer them briefly. And then I have one question for the audience, because I have the question for the audience. I can't ask them a question. They won't answer it if I don't ask their questions first. It's a trade-off. So I will read all of them, and then you answer them briefly, yeah? So to all of you, Bart or Moses, what is the next step or plan of process to take this dream paper to the practical level? So now what? Now you have the paper, now what's going to happen? Another question to all. So this one is, let's say that first one is for Bart and Moses. For all of you, is it possible for donors to fit into the agenda of communities rather than the communities fitting into donor agenda? Why is it that donors are never flexible? Is power of funding, is it power or funding is a real power? I don't really understand that part, but I think we get the gist of it. Why is it that the donors are never flexible? And then specifically for Zora, will you share evaluation experiences on your organization's experience with participatory grant making, communities in the lead of grant decisions? Are you going to share? That's a yes or no question, so I think you got that, Zora. Zora and Maite, how does Mama Cash or Gaga see the issue of corporate interest? What makes for them to be able to work in a radically different way? Yeah? How do they work in a radically different way? Well, if the question isn't clear, you don't have to answer it because I can't do much about clarifying it. Then to Maite, where lies the power of an alliance such as Gaga, and what positively surprised you as a coordinator within this alliance? So what has the experience of coordinator been for you? And then another question for Zora, when you say some international, in brackets, NGOs would lose power, what would they concretely lose? So what is it that is at stake here when we say they would lose power? So I think, should we just start at the top, since the first question had the most time to be thought about? So Bart, I'll start with you. What's the next step, briefly?
Briefly, three things. First, next week we have a gathering on Thursday again, under the umbrella of strategic partnerships, and it's about shifted power, and we are going to exchange best practices, lessons and questions and so on. So that's the first practical thing we'll do next week.
Are we invited?
Everyone is invited for that, yes. Yeah. The second step is that, so this is walking the talk, making it practical. But the second step is we would like to proceed with this community of practice. Well, there's a lot of suggestions made this afternoon already, but there's many more. So we'd like to proceed with this community of practice, and everyone is invited to participate, and so to keep dreaming, but also to translate the dream into practical action. The third one is a practical one too, is that we are now confronted with a current system, accountability system under the subsidy scheme of Power of Voices, which is a kind of given fact. But we want to concretely discuss with the ministry. We know that there is quite some interest. How can this accountability, how can this bureaucratic burden be transformed according to the lines that I think especially Maite and Zora was explaining, really providing for flexibility, adaptivity and trust.
Yeah, very interesting. And great that, again, you have 3 points. That makes it very easy to do it briefly. Thank you so much for that. Moses, is there anything you'd like to add here?
I think in terms of taking these dream papers forward, I can say that Christmas has come a bit early for Pathos, because one is that in the reimagining INGO, the Ringo Social Lab, we were able to develop prototypes, and Pathos has been chosen to, like the testing for, doing the piloting of 4 of these prototypes. So I think, there is an opportunity there that as Pathos tests these 4 prototypes from the Ringo Social Lab, it's a time to begin looking at, how do we communicate? How do we do partnership? How do we do this? So I think for me, it's an opportunity that is available to Pathos to be able to infuse this dream paper into the Ringo Social Lab piloting process of the prototypes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so indeed, the winds of change are there and the opportunities are there because these pilots are there to try out these prototypes. So great opportunities at your doorsteps. Then I'd like to go back to this question that was for Zora and Maite. So I think there's some clarification coming in. How does Mama Cash or Gaga see the issue of corporate interests? What makes it possible for them to work in a radically different way despite these corporate interests? What makes it possible for you to work in a radically different way, I think? So first question is, what do you think of these corporate interests? And how can you work in a radically different way despite them? Should we start with Maite?
going to give the floor to Zora.
Zora,
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Well, to be honest, I can give the reflection from Gaga on what corporate means and investors mean, right? So Gaga really focuses on strengthening movements, women-led movements, the environmental justice movements, to really start addressing the environmental and climate crisis that we're facing. So we're talking about the root causes, right? And so we definitely see investors and corporate interests behind a lot of those issues. And so we personally wouldn't accept any funding from corporate interests in that sense. But what we are working with and what we are advocating for, and we work very closely and support community-based organizations who are fighting corporate interests in their own communities to change their ways. So obviously this can be through safeguard policies, looking at how they're implementing projects, how they're financing these projects. So if they're going through a big international financial institution, we try to influence that, because the way things are working right now is based on an extractive capitalist model, and we need to change that. So this goes back to wanting transformational change from the corporate sector as well. So that's briefly how I'm trying to answer that question around corporate interests. I'm gonna maybe pass it on to Zora to see her perspective.
Thank you for that.
So I think I might have understood the question differently.
Okay.
I thought they meant corporate interests like Mama Cash's corporate interests as an organization. If that's what was meant. Because I think Maite answered quite well the other part around social responsibility type corporate questions. So how do I see the issue of that? Yeah, it's a tension. I'm not going to lie. It's hard, right? So, for example, we, in the last round of funding with the Dutch government, we're debating the decisions. There were a number of pots of funding. Power of Voices was one. But for example, there was also a pot of money just for women's rights. And our corporate interests would say we should go and apply for that funding. And our kind of political interests would say we need to support other organizations in the Global South to access that funding. And so we took the decision not to apply and to support other organizations to apply and secure that money. And that meant a loss for Mama Cash's income base. Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, it wasn't a loss in that we didn't have it anyway, but a potential gain was missed out. And it's an area of tension, and we take it on a case-by-case basis, but we have a kind of a values approach, a principled approach, a political approach, where we do actually ask the question about, okay, yeah, it would help us, of course, in certain ways. We would have more funding, which means we can do more of X or Y, which we also find important in the world, right? We exist because we think what we're doing is important. But what would not doing it also help get done? And I think that's the part where it helps that we're all in this work because we actually do want to see change. We actually deeply believe that a better world is necessary and possible, and that we're prepared to make sacrifices and work hard in order to realize that dream. And so I think that's what it comes down to also at Mama Cash, that sometimes it pinches, right? And that's what I said, these are kind of painful. These are some painful decisions about what the consequences are for us actually shifting power. For some of us who currently have power and are gaining power, what would it mean to shift it? It could mean a loss in some way. And I think one of the questions was asking about that. But also, if the ultimate impact is achieved, that the agenda for why we exist in the first place, if that's still achieved, then the fact that we had to shrink or compromise or sacrifice something along the way is worth it.
Worth it, exactly. So really knowing your values, making value-based decisions is actually what you and Maite describe. I understand that the way Zora's understanding of the question is how it was meant. But so we got two for the price of one, basically. Thank you both for that. I think this is really helpful to really think about, okay, so what is the goal? What are you trying to achieve? And that actually reflects back on what you said earlier, Zora, about the idealism with which a lot of people are in this sector in the first place, really believing in a certain transformation, which is why you're here, and not so much your own growth financially or any of that. I'm going to move on quickly. There are messages coming in, I think it's because we're over time. Moses, before we end, is it possible for donors to fit into the agenda of communities rather than the communities fitting into donor agenda? Why is it that donors are never flexible? That was the question. Do you have a snappy, short answer to this question?
I think it is possible. All we need is because when we talk about donors, we need to know that there are human beings, real warm bodies that populate this thing called donors. And I think if they make themselves vulnerable, they can actually be able to listen to the community agenda. But for as long as they hide behind the veil of donor, then in a way, they're insulating themselves from learning. So I think it is possible. They can be immunized against that power and privilege. They can be, that veil can be taken away, and we see real human beings. And then once we start seeing real human beings, it doesn't matter whether it's an Italian or is Dutch. He'll be able to fit into the community agenda and be able to listen. You'll start seeing, really, person-to-person conversations.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. I think sometimes we forget that these are warm bodies that have names and roles, that occupy spaces and play roles. Now, Zora, I'm sure you can do this in a yes or no way. Will you share evaluation experiences of your organization's experience with participatory grant making communities in the lead of grants or decisions?
Yes, already on our website is a reflection from one of the community, it's called a ComCom, the community committee that makes the decisions on our biggest fund, a reflection from her on the experience. About to go up on the website is an article about our whole process, that 2-year process, what we did, how we did it, why we did it, how that happened. And then, yes, indeed, as we reflect more and write down our mistakes for the world to see, it will be shared with all.
Yeah, thank you so much for making yourselves vulnerable and sharing this with all of us. And thank you all for answering these questions very quickly. You see that we can do it when we decide that we can. We're still more than 15 minutes over time. And I did the whole question thing because I have a question for our audience. And I find the input from our audience really, really valuable because we've discussed so much here. We've talked about shifting. We've talked about transforming. We've talked about sharing. We've talked about the speed at which it needs to happen. We've talked about looking at ourselves. We talked about looking at each other, not operating in a void, knowing that there's so much more going on in terms of shifting the power and not allowing blind spots to dominate. Really open our eyes, show up for people in the Global South who've done the thinking, who've been talking about this shift for a long time, and learn from that, connect, build partnerships, trust each other, and use all those insights to continue to make these transformations. So now we've given all this input. We have the dream paper. We have these wonderful speakers from all over the world with a wealth of experiences. What is your next concrete step? Because you're now, as an audience, a part of this process, right? Bart has told us concretely 3 things that are the next step, right? How about you? I want to know from you. I want to see it coming in on the chat. What are you going to do? Because some of you have been really great asking critical questions, and sometimes that is easier to do than figure out what you will do. So what are you concretely going to do to make this shift, share, transformation of power? I know that I'm going to read some books so that I understand a lot more about what is going on in the Global South when it comes to things like shifting power. I, as someone who's known for talking a lot, I'm going to listen to Moses and use my 2 ears more than I use my 1 mouth. That's what I will do. But I hope that you are typing in the chat and that we can see from you what you will do. What will you concretely do as a next step? And I hope that I will see some of those appearing on the screen soon. And if I don't, I want to thank all of you for your input. I forgot my own instructions, which was that this is being recorded, and I was writing everything you were saying so that when I go home, I can tell my friends about what shifting the power could look like according to my speakers here. And I hope that we keep the dream alive and we continue to dream and create alternative systems, because ultimately we are the system, right? So I don't know if I will get these answers here, so I'm just going to round off now. I was trying to extend, but it's okay, it's enough. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for doing this collaborative process with us. Thank you for your critical reflections. Thank you for your dream paper. I hope all of these critical reflections will continue to be part of this wind of change that is blowing anyway, and that we, with all our values and our ideals and hopes for a more equal future, will blow in the correct direction that will allow us to exist in a more harmonious way. So thank you all, and have a wonderful day or evening or next phase of the next 24 hours. All right, see you all, and please look at the Partos website. Thank you, Wilde Ganze, and thank you, vice versa, for inviting me here. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Amma.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.